Good evening, everyone. This is today is June 20th, 2023, meeting of the Carrboro Town Council. Glad to see you all here today. Just a few opening items before we get started. First, I'd like to ask for a motion to excuse Randy from tonight's meeting, so you can't be with us tonight.
So moved.
And moved by Barbara, seconded by Eleazar, that we excuse Randy. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Also have a request from staff to postpone item E2 on the Racial Equity Commission charge amendments to a future meeting, so I assume everyone's okay with that. All right. We're going to start, as we usually do, by hearing from our poet laureate, although I think we may have a guest this evening. Kalisa Ray, welcome. Come on up.
Hello, hello. It's so great to be here. I am not the poet laureate of Carrboro, as you probably know. I'm Kalisa Ray. I live in Durham, North Carolina. I'm a poet, activist, speaker, teacher, and author there in Durham, but I'm filling in for Soteria Shepperson, who we all know and love. Soteria often calls upon me to fill in when she can't make it. It's an honor to be here. So I'm going to read a poem in two parts from my debut collection, Ghost in a Black Girl's Throat. Soteria wanted me to read this piece or these pieces because of just the wave, the climate right now with the wave of banned books, the importance of bringing back our stories in education and in the community, period. So this is called Epilogue for Banned Books. This is for Alice Walker, and this was the response to seeing her speak at the university that I started at, which is UNCW. And so this is for Alice Walker. Under the influence of spotlights and microphones and the scrutiny of the American public, some speak of assimilation as if it were a natural occurrence. The evolution of kinky to straight, brown to bleach, the inevitable result of stewing in the melting pot of this American culture. Somehow our brown turns invisible with a slight tongue trick. I have watched so many gray stages spin webs of lies to moderators and hosts, then turn chameleon, racial shapeshifter with ambiguous opinions on the matters that matter, but not you, Alice. Your work whispers for colorful narratives to come back from the margins, for our histories to climb out of the shadows and speak to the masses until they listen, until our inconvenient ink is no longer seen as a filthy smudge on America's reputation, but the title of America's cultural anthology. If we were to remove us, and all our sullen truths, what a vacant canon we would be left with without our griots preserving this strife, capturing each anguish, freezing these pages as time capsules. Our nation, on the cusp of becoming a collection of all the words we fear, all the little truths we whitewash and blacken out, are coming back to haunt us. Like you, I wait for the day when each child knows your name, when we race towards what we fear and relish in the unknown. The second part is buzzwords and banned books. I learned them on the pages first, fell apart and assembled notions of pain, held brilliant beloved in my hands, saw a mother saving her baby from slavery, felt the throb of each purple bruise on Miss Seeley's back blister and turn blue, heard that silence consumes a man, proving black boys are invisible, still knew caged birds would sing their way to freedom and all eyes would be stayed on him, prayed Pecola would discover the beauty that stretches beyond her skin, learned compassion is the greatest lesson before dying and all that lies within, and yet we still omit our stories, blackout pages, broken fragments in a forgotten land. We should cement these stories in history, not conceal truths and label them banned. What I know is there are still children who haven't heard Maya's name, haven't viewed God through the eyes of Zora, haven't heard her bitter, twisted refrain, haven't wailed on the mount with Baldwin or spoke of divergent dreams with Lorraine, haven't read the history of immortal generations or discovered truths with Wright, unlocked freedom with Alexandra or Claude, turning ghettos to promised lands at night. Some children still don't know the fiery passion of Martin, the beauty of Native Son. They will never know where they're headed until they see all the immaculate places they've come from. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalisa.
All right.
Thanks for joining us tonight. All right, Mr. Manager, I believe you have an introduction for us.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted an opportunity to introduce our Fire Chief, Will Potter. You've heard from him already, but I had not introduced him. He came through a national search. He's one of our own who came through the fire department, and we've known him since he was very young. And so we congratulate him and ask him if he'd like to come forward to say hello.
Welcome, Chief.
Evening, Mayor, Council. I really just want to say thank you to yourselves and to Mr. White for having the faith to put me in this position. So I said a little bit about it when we were talking, but so the last fire chief that came up through Carrboro was Chief Jake Hardy. He was the fire chief in 1973, and he was the volunteer chief. And so I think it means a lot. Carrboro Fire Department means a lot to me. Carrboro's home. I grew up a mile and a half from here. My parents still live there. So the people that live in Carrboro are my friends and family. And so I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to lead the department and continue to grow with the department. I think I first started coming up to Carrboro when I was 13 years old, trying to do ride-alongs. And so really just up here living the dream. So thank you for having the faith in me to continue to lead the department. And I look forward to working with you as we move forward.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Clerk, announcement of upcoming meetings.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Got a couple meeting announcements here. First up, tomorrow, June 21st, we'll have a TDA meeting, and that will be at 12 o'clock p.m., and that will be via Zoom. Also tomorrow, we have Affordable Housing Advisory Commission at 7 p.m. here at Town Hall. And then on June 22nd, we have a Human Services Advisory Commission meeting at 6 p.m., and that will be held virtual via Zoom. And then the next council meeting will be next Tuesday, June 27th at 7 o'clock.
Any other town meetings to announce, y'all? Say that tomorrow morning, the Orange County Chapel Hill Visitors Bureau will be meeting, the board will be meeting at the Sheraton. I think that's the only other one I have to add. All right, on to the public comment period. I think we have one person signed up to speak. Margaret Wiener. Coming up, Margaret, welcome. As you may know, we ask our speakers to limit themselves to 3 minutes. I ask you to do that. So I'll set my little noisy alarm.
Okay, is this the microphone?
That's the spot, thank you.
Okay. I am asking the town council not to rush a decision concerning Bowlin Creek Greenway and to ensure a transparent and inclusive process. I've been trying to make my way through the town's website, and I find it labyrinthine and confusing. I have a number of questions and suggestions. In the absence of a newspaper, where and how does the town post public notices? Is the Town of Carrboro website the major vehicle for communication? Not everyone has access to the internet, and the site is very difficult to plow through. Where is the plan for public engagement where citizens can comment? I found only a draft attachment from March 28th, which noted this project has been the source of considerable community controversy and proposed hiring a firm, individual, or team experienced in dealing with sensitive issues to develop a process. Has this happened? Given that acknowledgement of controversy, why revisit this plan now in particular? And why the rush? When will the public process begin? What is the schedule? This morning I learned that something called Carrboro in Motion listed a town-sponsored event at the Royal Park Apartments on June 16th. When was this posted? How were concerned parties notified? Who was invited? Has the town explained clearly the choices for alternate routes such as Sewell School Road? What alternatives are being considered? When will we know initial and long-term economic and environmental costs? Has an environmental assessment been made? Shouldn't residents have input into the relative costs of alternate pathways? Is it fiscally responsible to make decisions before making these calculations, given a $40 million library and the fact that plans always underestimate costs? An October vote provides little opportunity to hear all voices and for people to learn about the issues. You'll be gone in July and August. How can we get questions answered and misunderstandings dealt with? I propose the town hold a series of forums at which staff and council members would answer questions from the public in early September. I would also like to see public opportunities for hearing from different groups rather than just from the town. I ask that a fact sheet with answers to the questions I've posed be made available in a variety of media, not only on the internet. I urge these materials be made available for public perusal and discussion well before the town council makes any decisions on a project it recognizes as controversial. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Margaret. All right, Mr. Manager, the consent agenda, please. And I'll note that we do have to pull one item because of a potential conflict of interest, so that'll be item number 3.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. The first one is approval of the October 11, 2022 minutes. The second item is the 319 Project Grant Ordinance Amendment. The purpose of this agenda item is to amend the grant ordinance to approve the expenditure of up to $15,000 of funds from the Stormwater Utility Enterprise Fund for construction for the 319 grant project. The next item is consideration of recommended human services funding for FY24. The purpose of this agenda item is for the Carrboro Town Council to consider human services funding recommendations for FY24. The next item is approve amending the Home Investment Partnership American Rescue Plan allocation plan. The purpose of this agenda item is to request that the Town Council approve a proposed amendment to the Home Investment Partnership American Rescue Plan allocation plan approved by Council on February 21st, 2023. HUD requires one modification to the Home ARP allocation plan for approval. This amendment is designed to bring the approved plan in alignment with HUD requirements. The next item is the ordinance amending Chapter 4 of the Carrboro Town Code related to employee benefits. The purpose of this agenda item is to request that the Town Council amend the personnel policy to reflect proposed benefit changes for town employees. The next item is consideration of a minor modification request to the special use permit A for level 2 rooftop solar array facility at the Arts Center at 400 Robertson Street. The purpose of this agenda item is to request that the Town Council consider approving a minor modification request for a special use permit A for the Arts Center at 400 Robertson Street. The modification will allow the property owner to construct a level 2 rooftop solar array facility at the stated address. The next item is a request to extend the timeline for the Community Safety Task Force to complete recommendation report. The purpose of this agenda item is for the Town Council to consider extending the work of the Community Safety Task Force up to 6 months through November 2023.
All right, council members, as I mentioned, we need to pull item number 3 because of a conflict of interest there needs to be a recusal for that. So is there a motion to approve 1, 2, 4 through 7 by Barbara? Seconded by Sammy. All in favor of approving the consent agenda as amended, I'll say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Matter passes unanimously. Item number 3, I believe, Susan, you needed to recuse yourself. And Mr. Attorney, just want to make sure that we have an opportunity to talk about make sure we're using the correct procedure according to that new statute on these board memberships. So, Susan, go ahead. I think just a report for the clerk for the record what the reason for the recusal is.
I'll be recusing myself this evening because I sit on 2 boards that are included in the recommended funding for nonprofits, both Porch, Chapel Hill, Carrboro, and Orange County Living Wage.
Sammy.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. Sorry for not having sent them earlier. They're the kind that could have been answered over email. One was, I was wondering, Mr. Manager, it looks like there's an allocation to Chapel Hill and another one to Chapel Hill and Carrboro. I'm sure it's a situation probably where they're acting as agents of some other project or something. Am I correct, or what are those funds for?
I understand it's for the foundation, not the schools themselves, and they support mental health care for kids.
The school one?
It's the foundation, yes, the Chapel Hill Carrboro ones, and
Okay.
then there's a youth employment program as well.
Okay.
Carrboro funds are supporting 6 Carrboro youth.
Okay, great. And then the other question I had, we received an email from Club NOAA, Karen Dunn, and there was a question about a program that existed with our planning department, where there's a transitional employment position. I was wondering if that's something that may be able to be reinstituted, as it seems like it's a very valuable program for Club NOAA.
I don't know the answer to that, but I can look into that one.
You could, I would appreciate it. Those are my questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Sammy. Any other questions on this item before we take a vote? So, a motion by Eleazar. Is there a second? Do that. You're recused from this item.
Let's forget.
Or second.
Happy to second.
Seconded by Danny. So, Mr. Attorney, I just want to make sure we're doing the right procedure here because it's a relatively new statute. And given there's the duty to vote that we usually are dealing with, and normally to excuse someone from voting, the council has to formally excuse that member from voting. But in this case, the statute seems to say just the board member recuses themselves. How do we?
It does, and I think it's appropriate.
Okay. So Susan has recused herself and reported to the clerk the reason for that recusal. There's a motion by Eleazar, second by Danny to approve item 3 on the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Matter passes unanimously. All right. Thank you. And we'll move on to other matters. Mr. Manager.
Okay, the first item is update from the OWASA representatives. The purpose of this agenda item is for the members of the OWASA Board of Directors to provide a report on OWASA activities. We have guests here tonight.
Well, welcome guests. Will you come up to the podium, please? And if you'll just be sure to introduce yourselves so everybody watching from home and in the audience knows who we are. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Sells, council members, Manager White, and members of the community. Thank you for inviting us to your meeting to present our annual update. My name is Bruce Boehm. I'm the chairman of OWASA. On behalf of the OWASA board, we want to thank the town council for appointing our newest board members, Mel and Elmira. They've contributed significantly in their first year on the board. Tonight we'll present topics including our 2024 budget, an update on PFAS, PFOA, and what it means for our community, an update on the Western Intake Partnership, and our diversity and inclusion program. We're of course happy to take questions on any topic. Todd Taylor, OWASA's executive director, is also available to answer questions. I'll go first with an update of the fiscal year 2024 budget. At our last board meeting on June 8th, the board approved the fiscal year 2024 budget. OWASA is committed to providing a high level of service to our customers, and we regularly look for opportunities to be more efficient. Financially, however, there are a few challenges in the years ahead. Approximately half of OWASA's annual budget is invested in making improvements to the community's water and sewer system, primarily to repair and replace existing infrastructure and ensure the reliability and resiliency of water and sewer services in the community. The other half is used for the operations and maintenance of the entire system and to ensure that our essential services are available around the clock to serve the community. OWASA is exclusively funded by the rates and fees that we charge for our services. The quantity of drinking water used by the community for the last several years has been about the same as it was 30 years ago, even while the number of customers has grown by more than 80% over that same time period. This remarkable achievement in water conservation is beneficial to the community in many ways. However, with large fixed expenses, flat sales volume means that rates have to go up in order to pay for constantly increasing expenses and the need to invest in maintaining our infrastructure. That's the nature of running a capital-intensive business, which is what we have. The fiscal year 24 budget includes funding a number of projects for which further delay could be costly or detrimental to utility operations. Additionally, like many sectors across the country, inflation is impacting a variety of costs associated with our operations, including chemicals and materials vital to providing our service to the community in a safe and effective manner. Inflation and supply chain issues have also impacted construction costs. There are two other new factors that affect our fiscal year 2024 through 28, that is 2024 through 2028 capital investments program budget. One of the investments necessary for meeting the EPA's new proposed PFAS regulations, where we project that we will need to spend approximately $50 million over the next 5 years to be in compliance. This investment is about 1/3 of the capital investment expenditure plan for the next 5 years. The other is ensuring our long-term water supply, where we project needing to spend about $20 million over the next 5 years. The fiscal year 24 budget is based on the needs of the organization and requires a 9% increase in monthly drinking water and sewer rates. The board considered an alternative budget scenario that would reduce the amount of the rate increase for fiscal year 24, but the risk of deterioration of OWASA's level of service to the community is significant and quite undesirable, and it would require larger rate increases in the out years. Mel will now talk in more detail about the PFAS and the Western Intake Partnership.
Hi everyone, I'm Mel Kramer, and this is my first time speaking at a town council meeting, and I'm a little nervous. I'm going to give you an update on PFAS and on the Western Intake Partnership. On March 14th, 2023, the EPA announced a new proposed regulation for 6 PFAS compounds in drinking water. These regulations will likely be what OWASA and other water providers will be required to meet moving forward. We have expanded our ongoing PFAS monitoring to include University Lake, which was involved in the initial testing several years ago, but showed lower levels of PFAS than Cane Creek Reservoir, creeks flowing into Cane Creek Reservoir, and the biosolids produced at the Mason Farm wastewater treatment plant. We have engaged a consultant to assist our work in this area. We are also evaluating our water treatment process and modifications that can be made in the short and long term to reduce PFAS levels in our drinking water. We continue to post PFAS monitoring results to our website at owasa.org and are evaluating how to incorporate these new test sites as well as the coming regulations into the results dashboard. As Bruce mentioned earlier, we are expecting that a major capital project, estimated at $50 million, will be needed at the Jones Ferry Water Treatment Plant to meet the EPA's recently proposed regulations. Preliminary planning for this project is underway, to be followed by pilot testing and detailed design running through mid-2025, and then roughly 30 to 36 months of construction. The new PFAS drinking water treatment process is expected to be operational in 2028. We will continue to provide updates to the community as regulations are finalized, the work progresses, and additional information becomes available. And now for an update on the Western Intake Partnership. The Western Intake Partnership includes OWASA, the City of Durham, the Town of Pittsboro, and Chatham County. The partners propose to build a new intake on the western side of Jordan Lake, a new water treatment plant which may be built on OWASA-owned property in Chatham County, and transmission lines and pump stations. The goal is to have the facilities operational by 2031. The OWASA Board of Directors received an update at our April 13th, 2023 meeting. OWASA's involvement with the Western Intake Partnership to this point includes investing in planning, permitting, and preliminary design projects to access water from the Jordan Lake allocation. Since demand projections indicate that we will not need water from Jordan Lake on a regular basis in the near future, OWASA is limiting its involvement in the proposed facilities to the proposed intake and transmission pipelines. This infrastructure is difficult and costly to expand in the future, and investing in it now ensures that we will meet the community's projected water needs over the next 50 years. The OWASA Board of Directors will determine at a later date whether we will invest in the final design and construction of these proposed facilities. OWASA staff and General Counsel have been working with the other partners to develop a draft interlocal agreement that will specify how the partnership will work together once the facilities are complete. The Western Intake Partnership project is in the early stages, and OWASA will continue providing updates to the community as it progresses. Thank you for your time. And over to Elmira for an update on diversity and inclusion.
Good evening, everyone.
Evening.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you about what we're doing and for appointing us to the OWASA board. It's been very enlightening, I'll say, because we all live here, and it's important to us. The water is important to us and how we handle it. So, to talk about diversity and inclusion, the update, as you know, an effective organization and its operational efficiency depends on its structure, its people, and the community of stakeholders, which is what you are. So first of all, I'd like to just say thank you for your service and for to our town, because it's a wonderful thing when we have people as interested in what we drink and what we do as it is as this council is. But there's little doubt that in the coming months we will be busy, and you will be busy in this exciting time for Carrboro as well as OWASA, as the regulations regarding water quality and treatment continue to be passed down from external regulators. New housing is being constructed, new businesses are coming to town, and new residents are joining our community. The question is, what will they see from the service provider? That's the question I ask. Who will they see? I'm here to give you a brief update on the efforts in workforce diversity and inclusion. That's because it's an important part of what OWASA is doing and an important part of their strategic plan. Promoting diversity and inclusion is a top priority for OWASA, which has had an active DI program since 2016. DI initiatives were identified as OWASA values in the strategic plan that was adopted in fall of 2022. In fact, the Board of Directors participated in training in November 22 with Visions Incorporated to help promote understanding, reflect on, and share experiences that inform the lens through which each member of the board conducts their analysis and contributes to the board. That would help support the OWASA team. In fact, the focus, I enjoyed the sessions and the learning opportunity because it focused on the keys to inclusive leadership, which was a different twist on how we talk about diversity and inclusion. Understanding the people that you're working with on a board is important, and their perspectives from which they offer their suggestions and opinions. So as you may observe, OWASA is just in the beginning stages to engage in initiatives, internal and external, that promise to be more impactful over time. That's all outlined in the strategic plan. Just for comparison purposes, in 2016, between now and 2016, OWASA's female representation decreased by 1%. The workforce, however, on race and ethnic diversity representation increased by 6.1%. So in 2016, the workforce was 22.8% racially diverse, and today the representation is 28.9%. The percentages don't really reflect the complete picture of the efforts that are underway, because people change jobs, people move around. It's what they're doing internally every day, day-to-day, that matters. So how is it built into the day-to-day? How is diversity, equity, and inclusion practiced at OWASA? It's what I wanted to talk about for a couple of seconds. First of all OWASA employees are required to attend DEI training every year. Now OWASA reviews the recruitment, promotion, employee development, and pay administration processes for inequity, and provides opportunities to include non-supervisory staff in the decision-making. OWASA works to provide an environment where employees feel comfortable speaking truth to power, that's their words, and sharing their unique experiences with the rest of the team. Also, the recently created guiding principles were expanded to include belonging. OWASA is committed to collectively advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging across the entire organization. So their DEI is now DEIB, a program which is consciously and intentionally making an effort to ensure that all team members feel respected, valued, appreciated, and connected to OWASA. OWASA works to implement the DEIB in the day-to-day. Some examples are annual employee training. They have embedded the core competencies into performance review evaluations. Recruitment requirements, now you have to have at least one member on the panel from an underrepresented group and one member outside of the hiring department. The hiring supervisor and one other person also reviews all applications. They also track the diversity of candidates through each step of the recruitment process to mitigate any bias. That strategic plan that was developed in FY24 that goes through FY28 was and adopted in fall of 22 has a focus on employee recruitment, retention, and development for the organization. In fact, they recently closed a recruitment process for the diversity and inclusion specialist position. This is the first type of position of this type that was ever created and recruited for in OWASA. So that's an advancement I think that we can all support and be proud of. So a quick view or scan indicates that there are many challenges, of course, that lie ahead for reaching the goals that have been set to align incorporating culturally competent DEI practices within the organization, outside of OWASA as well as inside of the organization, as far as recruitment and retention is concerned. But the cadence for DEIB efforts is primarily implemented through that strategic plan. OWASA, like many high-performing water and sewer authorities, recognizes the need to reach a broader segment of the population to become more diverse. However, we must remember that decision-making and personnel decisions give way to policies, judgments, and discourse about longevity, pay grades, and lockstep pay systems, which we all are familiar with. They are the regulators, oftentimes, and governors inhibiting retention and recruitment objectives. So that's my report, my update. I'll turn it back to Bruce.
We're happy to take any questions.
Okay. Thanks so much, Elmira, Mel, Bruce, for being here. I understand also some congratulations are in order for our two Carrboro representatives who were just elected as officers on the board, I understand, of the OWASA board. Is that right? So I think Elmira will be the new secretary and Mel will be the new vice chair. So congratulations and condolences on your new responsibilities. You've presented on some really important initiatives going on at OWASA. I know council members have been interested in hearing the update. So I also just appreciate, Bruce, you all organizing yourselves to be here tonight. I know it's a busy time of year for all of us here in local government. Are there any questions from council members? Sammy?
Yeah, I'm just, also appreciate y'all being here, stepping up, being officers, and the information you shared tonight. I'm interested in both of the PFAs and the Western intake. My question on the PFAs, it's a lot of $50 million investment, right? So turns out I forwarded an article that describes how a recent study identified 26 types of PFAs, and the EPA is currently requiring treatment of 5. And so given that we're going to be making a $50 million investment, to what degree can OWASA check for those other 26, which, by the way, 12 are not even included in current EPA's monitoring, and then 3 fall outside of the working definition of PFAs. So all that to say, like, relying on the EPA as our standard for what we do locally for safeguarding the well-being of our citizens by the water that they consume is not a good standard. And so my question is OWASA, could they analyze the water for these other things and incorporate whatever equipment that they're going to be implementing so that it could treat water for those PFAs?
A great question. By the way, the $50 million is an estimate, and a reasonably rough estimate, because there just isn't a lot of history in the remediation process for these chemicals. On the specifics of your question, Todd's a much better person to answer that than me. So.
Sure, thanks.
Welcome, Todd. Thanks for being here.
Thank you all. Todd Taylor, I'm the Executive Director for OWASA. It's a really good question, and it's one that we struggle with, especially when you have emerging issues like this in the water. Currently, the analytical methods used to test for PFAS are very limited. So those 26 compounds that are currently being tested for, that only is a very small fraction of the PFAS that actually exists out there. There are thousands of these compounds. And so those methods have been developed to reliably test for them so that you can, take a sample of water, make sure that you're not, getting false results, things like that. And these compounds are so ubiquitous in the environment that it's very difficult to even take the sample without contaminating it. Just think of rubber gloves, things like that. They're all embedded with PFAS. So it's a very difficult thing that everyone's struggling with, and sometimes the regulations come out before the analytical methods, before the technology exists to actually take these and do something with those. So we're struggling with that as well. I mean, it would be nice if there were a more elegant solution that we just put this in, it takes care of all the PFAS forever and always, and we're done. However, we've actually got to, over the next couple of years, we're going to do bench scale testing and pilot testing at our treatment facility to try and ensure what is the most effective treatment process that we can use to address the PFAS that we know we have, and try and balance it out with what is the cost of this, how effective can it be, can we actually use just one treatment process, do we need to use multiple treatment processes to address these? So when Bruce was talking about that $50 million estimate being a very rough estimate, it is very just based on kind of what we know right now, but we actually don't know what technology we're going to end up with. We don't know a lot of the answers at this point in time. But it is very much in our future that we realize that there may be other PFAS down the road that we have to address. The newest, we participate with the EPA in some of their studies on emerging compounds of concern, and so those are coming out, and there's more PFAS compounds listed on that list that we'll have to send them water samples in. They'll look at those. Of course, it's a process that they have to go through to determine what the health risk is for some of those. But we certainly want to address the PFAS. We want to get the PFAS out of the water, but there's a process that's involved in actually doing that, and we want to make sure we make the correct decision and hopefully only have to make the big investment one time.
So my understanding, thank you for your explanation. I understand that there are other states in the Union and the European Union itself and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development all have different tighter standards than the EPA. And so I guess my question is, is there a way in which we could potentially contact and learn and have higher standards as we learn from these other places that are actually adopting those standards, and learn from them to what degree they're actually identifying the methods to treat the water? Could that be part of OWASA's process as you're doing this kind of assessment? Because it sounds like it's very much a relationship with the EPA, but the EPA is, subpar on this.
Sure, there's a lot of different methods that exist out there, and that's one of the complicating factors of when we started our monitoring program was which one do you choose, because at that point in time there weren't even standardized tests that you could run. You could send it to a lab. They may have multiple methods that they could use, and you just kind of have to pick one. And some of those folks that you're talking about are using different methods from what the EPA approved method is. So we're not in the research side of things, so at OWASA, and it would concern me to kind of go into this and not fully understand what method they're using, how have they approved this, what have they, what tests did they run, how many samples did they put through this, and how did they check to see that they weren't getting incorrect results, those kinds of things like that. But this whole arena of PFAS is evolving. And I know the folks down at UNC have been to our facility taking samples, things like that. The states come in taking samples, trying to work through some of these bigger questions about, how do you analyze for PFAS? What is a good method? There's certainly a lot of information out there about it, but we tend to look towards the folks that are doing this on a regular basis because we're not in the research realm.
Yeah.
So we rely on those folks to kind of say, look, the scientists that are looking at this, we've run these various methods. These seem to be the most effective.
Yeah, I mean, all I'm saying is I'm encouraging the board to press staff of OWASA. I know that when we don't have capacity within our staff, what we end up doing is hiring consultants that can do the work, and to really, get a broader perspective in terms of what the options are of who can measure and what the appropriate chemicals are. To not know isn't a good option when there may be other options of other people who actually do know. And I think that we know that there are those options. So to expand the horizon of what we can do would make me more comfortable with our water locally. In regard to the Western water intake, I remember back in August, I think 3 or 4 years ago, y'all were considering the various options, and of one of those options was the reuse water one, but there's also conservation, and obviously conservation is a problematic one in that it translates into, as you opened up your statement today, a decrease in sales, and you depend on revenue generation. So there's this catch-22 of like you don't want to do conservation because it represents lack of revenue to pay for infrastructure. And yet, if you go down the supply route, you are talking about investments of money that further keeps us on this treadmill of needing to sell more water and not be able to do conservation. And so I'm just curious to understand, along with that, then there's the whole allocation of Jordan Lake. OWASA wants to demonstrate that we have a need for it to justify our continued allocation. That's been an ongoing kind of like stance OWASA has taken for a while. So these alternatives have been kind of reduced in their priority. And I'm just, given how successful we've been with conservation, wary of thinking that we will be needing water as soon as we think we will, because we've been so effective with conservation. So I guess what I'm getting at is I really hope OWASA is able to, the board, really do a proper assessment that weighs all these complexities of like cost-benefit analysis. Because I don't think like just because we want to keep the allocation, we should go down one route, or just because we don't want to spend, lose our revenue, like maybe there's a way to lose revenue but not have to spend, so like to not make these assumptions be like so like taken for granted, like to really delve into them. In terms of the reuse, I know one of the barriers to it was that it's currently illegal in North Carolina. We've had legislative breakfast meetings with our local state representatives, and I was just wondering to what degree OWASA's had those conversations with our legislators to potentially have this legalized.
There were a number of things that you said, Sammy, that I wanted to respond to. Back on the PFAS issue, if I can, I can assure you that OWASA management and the board is very much in favor of remediating whatever forever chemicals we can. We're not limiting ourselves to those chemicals that the EPA requires. And if it's cost effective to get some more remediated, we'll certainly do that. And if you look at our history of various elements that are in our water, we're consistently very low compared to our peer group. And because we understand that it's important for our community to have clean water. And even though we potentially might not have to spend as much in processing and still be marginally below the level, the EPA levels, we decided we wouldn't do that, that we would have cleaner water. So that's very much an operating principle of the organization. On the long-term water supply issue, there are a number of different things that we have to manage at once, and some of them are very, very long-term. And because of that, we have to make some decisions now so that we're in the game if need be in 35 or 50 years. And one of them was accessing water from Jordan Lake. And the project is ongoing to build the western intake now, and we judged that it was important for us to have a stake in that process, which is why the board decided we were going to go down that route. We're not committing to the full investment over the, 35 or 50 year period. We're taking it incrementally. And if, for example, water reuse becomes legal and there's technology that makes it cost effective in 5 or 10 years, we could choose to stop the investment in the western intake and shift direction. And that could happen with any of the choices that, or any of the options that we looked at over the last few years. So, and then a third thing that I wanted to mention is we have a very sophisticated modeling effort at OWASA to try to predict what demand is going to be, taking into account our estimates at how well we can do in educating folks on conservation, and yet not overstating how effective we can be. Because, like I said, we have to make investments very early on because we're a utility very early on, so that we don't run the risk of running out of water in 5, 10, 20 years. On the specific question of the water reuse, Todd probably can answer that one better.
Sure, thanks. So, I mean, just to put it out there, if y'all want, we are in touch with our legislators and can push for that to get legalized. There's been an interest expressed in learning more about it and potentially like pushing that. So, is that something that WASA is interested in?
I think beyond the WASA, I think the water industry would be interested in that. I think that WASA may not be the appropriate vehicle for that because we are not in a desperate water supply situation. Like Bruce said, we're looking far out into the future and we also have options. So I don't know that our case would make it for them, but I think we would definitely support that because we see down many years into the future that water scarcity will be an issue and that this will be an option that needs to be looked at as it is in some of the more arid parts of the country. However, OWASA is probably not the example that we would put forward as.
Yeah, the reason I thought maybe an example, because you guys had it competitive with Western intake. It was competitive except for the fact that it was illegal. So competitive in terms of cost and amount of water that it could generate. So you're in the midst of that decision making. So I think it is valuable, but actually that's for our legislator to judge himself. Just putting it out there, I think we need to follow up, and we've talked about it for years, and we can do that. Thanks for all your information.
Thanks, Sammy. And we did include that item on our legislative list of priorities this year. So it's something that we can continue to talk to our legislators about for sure. Thank you. Next on my list, I have Susan and then Eleazar.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you all for your presentation this evening. Congratulations, Mel and Elmira, for your fast climb up into leadership positions at OWASA. Straight on up. And Elmira, I wanted to also say that was the first time I've heard of DEIB, and I appreciate it, and I hope it's the first of many more times I hear that. It's wonderful that you're incorporating that. at OWASA. I'm mindful of the clock. We have our own little thing called a budget to deal with later this evening, but I do have one budget question, and then I had one question that Randy asked that I pass along since she's not here this evening. First, in terms of the budget, Sammy talked about how complicated it is in terms of flat sales volumes. I think I read over the last 3 decades. So I understand the complications that you all face in terms of the budgeting, but it does mean a 9% increase in your rate. And I know OWASA has sort of a graduated fee structure. Is there anything in addition to that you've considered in terms of trying to cushion the effect of such a steep increase?
The demand actually hasn't been flat over the past 30 years. We're the same as what we were 30 years ago. It rose dramatically in the middle and then started coming down. So that's the dynamic that happened. I assume your question is directed towards households that don't have a lot of resources to pay for water and sewer. We're not, by law, allowed to charge differentially dependent on the income or the assets of our customers. Every customer who buys 4,000 gallons a month will pay the same amount for that. We do have a program called Care to Share that's been reasonably effective at helping folks. And there may be some other programs. Todd could perhaps describe other programs that may be out there. On the other side of it, the rate increase side of it, there are a number of reasons why that increase is high and will continue to be high for the next few years, as we have described. And there's one other factor that I should have mentioned, and I realize now that I didn't. During the pandemic, we did hold back on capital improvement expenses so that we could not have rate increases, and we now need to address that deficit, and that's a factor in there as well.
You also had a moratorium, as I recall, on people who were behind on their payments. And are you still catching up with that as well?
Actually, Todd should answer that one too.
On that one, we are back to our previous practices for standard collection of debts and things like that. But we did extend that for a prolonged period of time, so that just went back into effect this year. And we got a lot of assistance from both towns to help with some of the folks' bills who had arrears. Couple of things I would mention. We do have another look at our Care to Share program as part of our strategic plan. We want to take another look at our customer assistance program and how we can maybe kind of look around and see what other programs are out there, and maybe there's something that we want to adopt. The other thing is, during the pandemic, there was a federal assistance program for water bills. It was called the LIWAP was the acronym. It was the Low Income Water Program. And there is talk that program may be picked up as a permanent program, and that would be fantastic, because I know the county did a lot of work over the pandemic with getting folks who qualified for that assistance, getting their water bills taken care of throughout the pandemic. And that would be a great program if that were to be implemented. And so we're watching that very closely and hoping that gets traction.
Right. So that would be targeted for lower income folks who are struggling to pay their bills. Mm-hmm. Great. Question from Randy. Before I start, I've heard I've heard PFAS and I've heard PFAS this evening. And is there do both work or?
I would say it's more commonly called PFAS.
Okay.
but
Okay. Randy mentions that PFAS, I think, first came before council a couple years ago when it was revealed that the monitoring levels at Cane Creek Reservoir were worrisome. At what point will OWASA find a need to reverse osmosis to filter the water? She says she thinks Wilmington is doing this now, and she's also wanting to know how to generate more publicity around this issue.
We haven't decided on a treatment technology yet. Reverse osmosis is a possibility for treatment. There are a number of technologies out there, and that's part of what we want to do with our testing over the next couple of years and run some pilot tests at our facility with our water to make sure we see the results that we're wanting to see. And so we haven't selected a specific technology yet to address PFAS, but that's some of the work we've got ahead of us. As far as getting the word out, we have a lot of information on our website about PFAS. I would direct folks there if at all possible. As we move along in this process, we'll certainly be communicating when we know more to everyone. But there's a lot of historical information about when we started our monitoring program, what the results of that have been, and what our plan is moving forward.
Okay. Thank you, Todd.
Eleazar, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, again, thank you all for the work you're doing. And congratulations to you, too. I know that you all do great things in leadership. Congratulations. Before I get just a couple of questions, I just want to say a quick story. My cousin came to visit me from Texas a number of months ago, and when he asked for a glass of water, I just grabbed the cup, opened the faucet, gave it to him. He looked at me like I was crazy. He looked at me like I wanted to poison him. And I was like, dude, just try it. Tried the water, was magnificently impressed. So the only thing he could talk about for the next 3 days was about how the water tasted great in Carrboro. So thank you for that. But along those lines, right, I wanted to kind of bring this conversation a little bit down to community level, right? So before I came onto this board, before I started looking at these reports, I didn't know what PFAS was. Right. So let's start there. For folks watching at home and don't have the ability to do the research, can you just simplify what is PFAS? Why is that important? How does it affect everyday folks?
Sure, I'll do my best. PFAS is a family of compounds that's been widely used since probably about the 1940s or so. It's a carbon and fluorine compound primarily, and it's a very strong bond. And what it's been used for is anything that you can think of that's non-stick, stain resistant, those kinds of things like that. It started out they also used it pretty widely for firefighting foam. So it was really good at putting out like jet fire fuel and fires that involve jet fuel, things like that. So it was used at a lot of airports. And then companies found out all these properties that it could do. So if you've ever had a Gore-Tex raincoat, if you've ever had a Teflon coated pan, you've ever had any of those kinds of things like that all make our life very easy. The inside of a microwave popcorn bag, what makes it not stick? PFAS. So it's all around us and has been used and manufactured for many, many years. The problem is that it's been found out that it's carcinogenic. So it can cause cancer over a lifetime of exposure. And because it's so ubiquitous, it's been found if there was blood tests done on all of us, we'd probably have PFAS in our blood right now. It's been found in rainforests. It's all over. So it's their nickname is forever chemicals. They don't break down naturally in the environment. So they're there, they stay there. They're very difficult to dispose of because you can imagine, how do you get rid of something that can put out a jet fuel fire? I mean, it's a very difficult thing to address. So that's in a nutshell what the PFAS are. They are manufactured compounds, though, and so there are a lot of companies out there that have used these for many, many years.
Thank you. I thought you were going to just tell me they're the chemicals that are bad for you and they cause cancer, but that works great. Thank you for that. No, but along those lines, and maybe I missed it, but is there a simple one sheet that we can share with folks when these questions come up? I know that you mentioned that there's information on the website, but is there something simple, quick and easy that already exists, and is that in multiple languages or just in English?
Sure, I'm sure there are. I mean, our website is full of a lot of good information, but you can find things at EPA, at the Department of Health. All of those places have good sheets. I'm certain that we could send you one that probably covers all of this, but it's hard to find just the one that doesn't go into a ton of detail about them. But we can look and see if we can send you something.
Well, that's just, I'm just mentioning it, right? Because, I know folks that are watching, and if there's something that's simple, then as we're talking about this, it's come up in several other issues on council. Kind of a great response for me would be, here's a sheet that comes from OWASA that has the information, and find that in multiple.
So our annual report, our water quality report card is coming out in a few weeks. It'll have information in there about this. I would also say that's going to every single customer that we have. So there'll be a way for them to access more information about PFAS. There'll probably be, there's a little bit in there about it, but there'll be more, more on our website if you want to dig deeper.
Oh, for sure.
In both languages.
Thank you. Second project. Thank you, Elmira. Last one is kind of switching over. I know that Mayor Pro Tem Romaine touched on this a little bit, but I'm concerned about folks not being able to pay for their water in town. Is that becoming an issue? I know that during the pandemic there was measures to help support community. Can you give us more information of, like, is that an issue you're seeing that's prevalent in town? Is it not? How is that affecting folks?
Well, it is definitely a concern that we have as well, and that there are folks in the community that have an issue with paying their bill. And it's difficult to tell right now because we are just coming out of the pandemic, so we don't have a lot of history of, are these folks chronically having issues, and we will try and connect them with resources if they are having a difficulty with paying their bill. But like I said, it's a little bit clouded right now because we don't have a long history. We've just gotten back to our normal billing processes. But yes, it has and will be a concern for us probably forever, is that there are certain folks in the community that struggle with paying their bill. And that's one of the reasons we want to look at our customer assistance program. We're hoping that the federal government maybe will implement a program to help folks with these issues going forward.
All right. Thank you so much. I would encourage folks to, there's some programs or something that comes up and you see a partnership that can be a stronger partnership with the town, specifically to support some of these families. Please bring it forward so that we can discuss and figure out how we can support folks in Carrboro. But with that, again, thank you all for your work, and thank you for making my cousin believe that water can be drank from a faucet. Mr. Mayor.
LASR. Next is Barbara.
So, first of all, thank you to Elmira and Mel, our dynamic duo from Carrboro, our representatives, for your service on the OWASA board. And also to Bruce and, of course, Todd, the executive director of OWASA. It's a great report. Appreciate it. Real happy to see a recruitment process for the diversity and inclusion specialist position, and also D&I was identified in the strategic plan. So all that's good to know. So also, I have a question from Councilmember Haven O'Donnell as well. Yeah, she's super busy. So she wanted to know about Stone Quarry, long-term plans, if or when that water resource will be included in the quantity available. Thank you.
Sure, that's a really good question. That is part of our long-range water supply plan, is to activate this stone quarry. The mining is supposed to cease out there in about 2030, and it'll take about 5 years for the site to be readied to expand the quarry. So where they're mining now and where the existing quarry is, those two will be tied together and we'll be able to fill the entire reservoir. But yes, it will be part of our overall water supply portfolio on or about 2035.
Bear in mind, the quarry doesn't increase our watershed, so we're not going to have more water, but we'll have more flexibility in storage. So we'll be able to weather lower periods better.
More flexibility in storage.
In storage of water. It doesn't increase the amount of water that we have.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Barbara. Thank you all very much, Mel, Amira, for your leadership, Todd, for answering all these technical questions from us that we were quizzing you about, and Bruce, for your leadership as well. Appreciate your time, taking the time tonight. Carry on.
Have a good night. Unless you want to sit up here. Do we need to move anything?
No, we're just receiving a report. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think we need to take action, do we, Mr. Manager? You can move to receive the report if you like.
Yeah, you can do
All
that.
right, so moved.
Is there a second? Moved by Eleazar, seconded by Barbara. All in favor of receiving the report, say aye.
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 Opposed? Susan and Danny are yeses by absence. Okay, I think we're going to get ready to adopt the budget here in a minute. So we'll hear from the Mr. Manager first about that. Do you have a presentation for us, Mr. Manager? Or?
No, just to give you an update, I'll read the adoption of the FY24 annual budget. The purpose of the agenda item is for the town council to adopt the annual budget for fiscal year FY23-24. And there's nothing new in the budget other than I put in $100,000 from the broadband project that we have in ARPA funds to use those funds to get the cemetery project underway. There's nothing else that's different about the budget. You do have an amended attachment A, and what that does just moves the contributions we're making to the partnership and to IFC. It was in section, let's see what section is that? Section 1, the Affordable Housing Fund. It just moved from there to the ARPA funding. That's the source of the funding that's coming from. And a few dates we need to clean up in the attachment, but that's the revision you have in front of you at the table.
Thank you very much. And so that $100,000 is just being moved over to the cemetery bucket, and it basically will allow staff to get started on what we essentially provided some guidance on last week.
Yes, to get to the conceptual plan to bring back for the council
draw
approval.
That concept plan
yes.
The way that we said we wanted it.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions for the manager on the budget before we discuss? Yes, Barbara?
So based on our conversation in the work session last week for Westwood Cemetery, do you have a time frame for when this may come back? Because we're having to, of course, redraw the I guess the conceptual plan based on what we said last Thursday. Do you know when it might come back to us? Will it be in the fall or?
I don't know exact date, but we'll get right on it. So as soon as we get to the consultant that helped us redesign that, we'll let you know how long it would take to get that done.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. Let's see. And I don't have anyone signed up to speak on this item, but I see Makita waving from the other room. Did you come to speak on the budget, Makita? Okay. Come on in. So, come on up to the podium. Thank you for being here. And Makita, as you know, we ask folks to keep their comments to no more than 3 minutes, so I'll have my timer set up here. Welcome.
Respected members of the town of Carrboro, blessed greetings and happy and blessed Juneteenth. As you're aware, I'm the president and a founder of the Landings Tenant Association, established in 2021. One of the longtime residents of the Landings at Winmore in Carrboro. For clarity, at this time, The Landings Tenant Association does not support Community Home Trust, and they continue to retaliate, disrespect, serve unwarranted eviction proceedings, and mistreatment from the current leadership of Community Home Trust and MSI. To cite a few concerns, there's a lack of trust with Community Home Trust and MSI management. There's a distinct disparity in the way that those receiving housing assistance are treated. One example is last week, Orange County housing participants were singled out by receiving unsealed envelopes of door notices of rent increases, while some residents not on assistance receive informative sealed letters. There continues to be attempts of entry without permission, undocumented work orders, unauthorized staff clearance, and notifications which is required by policy. There's a preferential handicap space for a Community Home Trust board member. There's the removal of resident community space to accommodate the needs of the site manager. There's a stolen bike rack never replaced since 2018, and which is a current garden for a Community Home Trust board member. There's constant camera surveillance of residents in a low crime rate area. What message are you sending to community residents when you permit this type of program management? Is this an appropriate message that you want to send? This is why residents are trepidated to speak out, because of fear of retaliation, their voices not being respected, and most importantly, that the changes won't be executed. Give me a minute, I'm got two. Give me a little. On behalf of the Landings Tenant Association, we do not support Community Home Trust. We ask that the town of Carrboro cease funding until sudden changes are made to respect the dignity and respect of lovely Carrboro residents. We envision a day that the best interests of the landings at Windmore is adhered to with a priority where the residents can feel confident that their affairs are being held in confidence, treated fairly, respected, their tenant rights upheld, in a decent, safe, sanitary place to call home.
Thank you, Makita.
If you don't agree with me, it's all right, but I'm gonna stand my truth.
Thanks for being here. Okay. So we have Sammy. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to, I feel Makita very much in large part because I'm also living in a low-income housing situation, and it's very precarious when rules aren't followed within the nonprofit, and you're vulnerable. And as an entity that funds an organization that we've been receiving a lot of complaints about, I feel really bad having no recourse for the people who live at the landings. So I guess one question is for staff. Is there any resource that the state of North Carolina provides for entities who find that the nonprofits that they're beholden to are not following their bylaws and their rules? Is that something, maybe Mr. Attorney, Mr. Manager, that we can serve as a resource in our community to provide those kinds of resources for members of our community? I mean, aside from the blunt tool that Makita was offering, which was, not fund such an organization, this would be another thing for us to consider. Any initial thoughts on something like that? Maybe requires more research.
Nick, will you please use the microphone?
Sammy, you've noted that, certainly the question of whether to continue to fund a particular entity, right, is relevant. And along with that, of course, is the question of any entity that you do fund, periodically you want to have reports from them, right? And to ensure that that your funds are being spent in a worthwhile manner. All right, you've already alluded to that. I do so, though, say, I don't really believe that the town can get involved in, if a nonprofit is not following, as you put it, their rules or regulations or whatever it might be, and bylaws, that's a matter between the nonprofit and its constituency, right? So my instinct is that, particularly because the entity that was spoken of here is one that I do believe you fund, you all know that you have the option to request that they come before you, right? And to the option to have them be heard on any kind of complaints that your constituents have provided to you, whether privately or in an open session like this.
Yes, I would also just follow up, Sammy, by saying that I believe a number of these issues that have been raised by both tonight and previously have been looked into with Community Home Trust. And I don't know, I think that continues to happen as complaints are filed. I don't know if it's how recently a complaint has been filed about that has come through the town. But perhaps it would be worthwhile to communicate with Makita and receive her written version of what she just shared with us so that the town staff could look into some of the things that she shared with us. I know that that has happened before. I think another question that comes to mind for me specific to the budget, which is what we're needing to address here tonight, is that my understanding is that the interlocal agreement that we have with Orange County and with Chapel Hill to fund Community Home Trust does not include the landings. It's the calculation that we use to fund the Community Home Trust, or our portion of it is based on the units, on the ownership units they provide in Carrboro, but not on the rental units and specifically on the apartment complexes. So I think that's kind of relevant here too, that our funding for the Community Home Trust is not for their ownership or services to the landings. That's probably something that will have to come up at some point as that interlocal agreement is addressed. But and I think that there is some intention to have that conversation. But okay, Barbara.
Thank you, Mayor. And just to follow up on what Councilmember Slade was saying, as he described it, I think he said a blunt tool, to not fund Community Home Trust. I know that this has been going on since I was on the Community Home Trust board, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe even longer. And it certainly gives me pause as we talk about policy and process, which is affecting people. It's very obvious to me tonight, and every time Makita comes, how impactful this is to her and potentially other people that, may be apprehensive about coming and speaking. And so I think I had also talked to Mr. White. That was one of my questions about the landings not being included, and I feel like they should be included. They're a part of the Community Home Trust stock now, even though it's on the rental side. So it's making me uncomfortable to continue to feed money to an organization that we keep getting complaints about. And the Community Home Trust has already been before us to answer some questions. I don't know, was there a meeting, Mr. White, maybe between you and Ms. Sanchez at some point? I know they were in here one night, answering some questions.
Yeah, shortly after I started, council asked me to take a look at that, and we did. I think we provided a report. I just made a note to go back and take a look at that. But when I
Okay.
first came on board, I had some conversation with her, and I think we provided a report to council about what we learned.
Thank you. And I think the real question is how long are we going to keep doing this? How long are we going to keep not listening? How long are we going to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result? I believe Makita when she keeps coming in here. There is something going on, and we've got to kind of remove ourselves from all this process stuff and look at this human being standing in front of us.
Thanks, Barbara. All right, so Mr. Manager, maybe you can follow up with looking back at that original report and seeing what other issues have come up since then, perhaps. Be a good place to start, I think, for council members to know about. Any other questions for the manager on the budget items before us here? Susan?
Just one question. First, I want to say, Mr. Manager, I really appreciate how responsive you've been to all the other questions that have been asked. And I have just one more. And that is on parking. And I know that when we had the work session on parking, we had talked about having somebody to help with parking enforcement. And we talked about possibly doing this pilot paid parking on Rosemary, where the Chapel Hill Carrboro parking lots sit side by side. And then I also think we talked a little bit about having parking meters kind of ready, parking the infrastructure ready to go at 203 when that opened, and then gradually roll out paid parking in other parts of town. I think that was my understanding from the work session. But this is all to ask, is that included in this budget? Is the funding to have somebody help with the enforcement as early as this year? And I wasn't clear.
Yes, there is funding to get paid enforcement and also paid parking to get it started in FY24.
Right.
Funding to get those underway, yes.
Great. That's all I needed to know. Thanks again.
Thanks, Susan. Did you have your hand up?
Go after
LSR and then Sammy.
Oh, I don't have many questions. I was just going to say whenever appropriate, I move to approve
Attachments.
the attachments A through J.
Thank you. Before Sammy, you go, is there a second?
Well, I would ask to divide the question on A. You can move everything else.
So then
Can we just get a second of the motion first, and then we'll worry about dividing the question?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved by Eleazar and seconded by Susan that we adopt the attachments A through J. Sammy, why don't you have your question or comment first, and then we'll go to the question of dividing.
Sure. So, as y'all know, I'm really concerned about climate change and the degree to which every year it's worse and worse. Like this year is great compared to what it's going to be next year, compared to what's going to be the year after that. We saw smoke coming from Canada, which itself is unusual because the winds never come south. And that's all a consequence of how the jet stream is meandering because of climate change itself. So from my perspective, is the emergency that we're in is a context by which I judge the kind of budget we have or not. And so, and I understand all the business as usual items that staff has to grapple with, and all the needs our community has. But within that context of understanding this thing that some people describe as being an existential threat, I can't support the budget, given that I feel like one of the whole reasons I participate in local government since I started was with the hope that we could do things differently on the local level. But it's really hard to break out of the mindset of business as usual without the calamity itself being felt to a degree where we can't deny it anymore. So I just want to, one, express gratitude for staff in compiling a budget that's appropriate in normal times, and efforts in trying to kind of lay out an alternative budget for dealing with the climate emergency. I've had many frustrations over the years in not being able to understand exactly what, if we were to achieve our goals, the breakdown annually is of how to get there. And I continue to have that frustration. We had slides presented that were missing column information that is essential to understanding kind of like where we're at in terms of where we need to be. But even if that information were available, the budget itself would then need to be matched. So we're really far away from actually achieving our goals. And it's for that reason that I won't be voting for the budget attachment A tonight. Everything else has to do with position and pay, salary, and contract to the attorney. Those I'm fine with, but there's a bulk there that I think I'm not in agreement with in terms of how we prioritize. So I just wanted to express that.
Thanks, Sammy, for sharing that. So if it's okay for everyone, I'd like to recommend LESR that we consider attachment A first, a separate motion, and then the others for that as a separate motion. So it's been moved by LESR and seconded by Susan that we approve attachment A, which is the budget ordinance for next fiscal year. Any further comments or questions? I'll just say before we vote, thank you, Mr. Manager, for a stellar job at putting together another budget for the town. And we have most or all of the department heads here tonight to celebrate, I hope, with us the adoption of this new budget. And especially thankful to the finance staff. Arch is also here tonight, and Langston for all the work that they put into corralling everything that needed to happen to make this come before us tonight. So thank you again for all the work. Moved by Eleazar, seconded by Susan to adopt attachment A. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Matter passes 6 votes to 1. It has also been moved by Eleazar, seconded by Susan, that we approve attachments B through J, which are listed in the packet. Do I need to enumerate what those are in some way, Mr. Attorney?
No.
Okay. All in favor?
They're very clear. I don't mean to be glib.
They're listed in the attachment. These are other resolutions related to the next fiscal year's budget. Any further discussion or questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That matter passes unanimously. Right. Thanks, everyone. Get to work. Okay. Next item is matters by council. Any matters by council members? Danny?
Just very briefly, council members, you will see some resolution language from me before next meeting. The nationwide Teamsters have agreed to authorize a strike for their UPS drivers. They will be in negotiations while we are on summer recess. But I just wanted to give you all a heads up that I will be proposing a resolution that we stand in solidarity with the Teamsters if they do strike. And just to use this moment to encourage people, please Google Strike Ready Teamsters if you're listening at home and you're curious about this. Really important labor negotiation and something that individual consumers in town, obviously UPS is pretty load-bearing infrastructure, even though it's a private company. So I think all of our individual choices, it'll be hard to stand in solidarity. I think it's worth planning around. So please educate yourself on Teamsters strike ready measures, and you'll hear more next week.
Thank you, Danny. All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Eleazar, seconded by Sammy that we adjourn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.